One of the most notorious cases here in Cleveland, the murder of Aliza Sherman. Just a few hours ago, her accused killer was back in court. Everywhere at 5, Catherine Huntley was there. She's live tonight with what unfolded today. Catherine.
Well, Gregory Moore, the former attorney accused in the brutal murder of his client, Aliza Sherman, continues to fight his case and continues to plead his innocence. Yesterday, we told you about how Moore's attorneys are claiming DNA evidence can actually clear Moore. Now, while that wasn't brought up in the courtroom, he was back in front of a judge today. Gregory Moore pleaded not guilty back in May to the charges of aggravated murder, conspiracy, murder, and kidnapping. The 51-year-old is accused of killing his client, Aliza Sherman, in March of 2013. Sherman was brutally stabbed outside of Moore's downtown office. She was there for an appointment. For more than a decade, a key piece of evidence in the case was this grainy surveillance footage of someone running away from the Erie View office building. It took 12 years, but Moore was indicted in May. Last month, he posted a $2 million bond to be out of jail while his case progresses. Just yesterday, Moore's attorneys filed a motion asking for independent DNA testing of a watch found on Aliza. His attorneys argue the DNA on the watch does not belong to Moore.
We expect the court to allow us to have this information retested. It clearly is exculpatory. It clearly shows that he was not a contributor to the DNA, and this information is very important to this case.
We will be responding in writing.
Because the prosecution just received this motion yesterday, they did not take that up in court today. Instead, they will argue those merits in the next pretrial hearing in 2 weeks. Now, while Gregory Moore did post that $2 million bond, he is not completely free. In fact, he is on constant GPS monitoring with some strict restrictions. He also can't have any firearms and is not allowed to leave the state or the country for the foreseeable future. In Cleveland, Catherine Huntley, 19 News.